Good afternoon, folks. How are you today? Good. Can you all hear me okay? All right, great. My name is Joey Yao. I'm the director of the CLC Performing Arts Center, and it's my pleasure to coordinate the Cultural Thursday program. And thank you all for taking the time to be here today. I'd like to also thank the faculty and staff at CLC for supporting this program, as well as those of you who made the trek out today to be here specifically for this. And if you have friends or family who could not attend but would have liked to, we are recording today, and this recording will be available on the CLC YouTube page next week, usually around Monday. I'll just take a moment to ask you if you do have a device, a laptop, a cell phone, a tablet, a pager, if anyone's still using a pager, if you could just make sure those are all turned off, we'd appreciate it. There will be time for questions after the presentation. Since we are recording, we do ask that if you do have a question, if you could please raise your hand and wait for me to reach you with a microphone and then speak your question into the microphone. That way we make sure everyone in the room can hear it, and we can also pick it up on the recording. If you are planning to ask a question, I would ask that during these next few moments while I'm talking, you coordinate with each other and all be in the same area. Otherwise, you're going to see me going back and forth constantly and really getting my steps in. All right, here we go. I am honored today to introduce our presenter, Sami Rahamim, Director of Communications and Community Affairs for the Jewish Community Relations Council of Minnesota and the Dakotas. As the public affairs voice of the Jewish community, the JCRC fights anti-Semitism and prejudice, safeguards the Jewish community, advocates for Israel, provides Holocaust education, promotes tolerance and social justice, and builds bridges across the Jewish and broader communities. This presentation today is intended to provide a history and educational overview of Judaism. Sami Rahamim has worked with the JCRC since 2018, where he leads communications and casework response for the JCRC, serving community members when facing anti-Semitism or other issues related to their Jewish identity in schools, the workplace, or in public. Prior to his work with the JCRC, Mr. Rahamim graduated from the University of Minnesota's Carlson School of Management. We thank him for being here today, and please join me in welcoming Sami.
Good day, everyone. Thank you so much for being here and coming to participate in this learning, in this conversation. My name is Sami Rahamim. I am with the Jewish Community Relations Council of Minnesota and the Dakotas. It's a great honor to be here with CLC, and so thank you to Joey and Dean Nelson and everyone who is involved in putting this together. It's really important for all of us to spend time learning from people and communities that are different from our own. And as Jews in Minnesota, we're a small percentage of the population here, especially in this part of the state. And so it's really a treat for me to be here with you, and I'm looking forward to sharing a little bit about Judaism, Jewish people, our community, and engage in some discussion as well and get into a conversation. So we call this presentation Judaism on One Foot. It's kind of a funny name. Where does it come from? So in Jewish tradition, we have lots of interpretations of our holy text, and really one could argue that that's the essence of Judaism, is an ongoing dialogue with our holy texts, one of which is, maybe you've heard of, it's called the Talmud, which is a series of arguments and debates between different Jewish scholars that took place many centuries, even thousands of years ago. And there's one kind of well-known story in the Talmud where a student comes to one of the great sages, one of the great thinkers of the time. His name was Hillel the elder. He's sometimes called Rabbi Hillel, and he lived 2,000 years ago. And the student came to him and said, "Tell me the essence of the Torah, to the essence of Judaism, while standing on one foot. Tell me what it's about." And Hillel answered, "That what is hateful to you, do not do to another." That's the entire Torah. All the rest is interpretation. All the rest is commentary. And now go study, go learn, go be in the world. And so that's our point of departure. So the first thing that we'll talk about is what we can be called Jewish history, can also be called Jewish memory. Some people even say that Jews, we don't really do history, we do memory. Because history is about, dates and facts and individual biographies and things like that. Memory is the story that you tell yourself about something that happened. And as Jews, we engage in a lot of storytelling about our past and in order to understand our present and our future. And so I'm going to share a little bit of and intertwine these two concepts, some of which can be called Jewish history, other can be called Jewish memory, but they really bind together. So we'll look at the Jewish past in order to understand how Jews understand the present. So the Jewish people's earliest memories can be found in the Bible, in what we call in Hebrew the Torah, and Christians often refer to as the Old Testament. As Jews, for us, it's the only Testament. That's the 5 books of Moses and the books of prophets and the writings that come after that. And if you've read the Bible, you know that it starts with a universal story. It starts with the creation of the entire world. And the first human beings, Adam and Eve, Noah and the flood. And then it sort of pivots from this universal story about all of humanity to a very particular story of one man, Abram, and his wife, Sarai. And God speaks to Abram, and Abram listens, and he hears God saying to leave your home, to go on this really significant journey to the land that I will show you. And Abram, what was significant about him? Why did God choose him? It was for challenging idolatry. Abram grew up in a world where there were many gods and people appealed to idols. And Abram had this revelation that actually there's really one God for all of humanity. This is the idea that forms the basis of monotheism and is the basis for Christianity and Islam as well as Judaism. So Abram, he becomes Abraham. Sarai becomes Sarah. And the Torah then starts to follow their family and their family story, their children, Isaac and Rebekah, Jacob and his wives, Rachel and Leah, and then their children, which become known as the 12 tribes of Israel. Jacob, after wrestling with the angel, has his name changed to Israel, which actually means one who wrestles with God. Yisrael, El being another name for God, Yisrael, to wrestle with God. That's what Israel really means. And the story then follows the Israelites, those descendants of Jacob, the people of Israel, into Egypt, right? They're enslaved by Pharaoh and then delivered to freedom through the partnership of God working in his divine ways and Moses as God's prophet challenging Pharaoh and declaring, "Let my people go." Now we're just about to celebrate the Jewish holiday of Passover in a couple of weeks, where the main activity of the holiday is to tell this story, to gather as families, as community, in our homes and conduct what's called a Passover Seder. Seder means order. There's kind of a outline of specific rituals that we do over the course of this one evening. And the sort of main event of that gathering, in addition to a feast with delicious food and wine and joyous song, where we're celebrating our liberation, our freedom, while also remembering the time that we were enslaved, is this act of storytelling. And now, I think all of us, this is something we share. We all have stories that we tell about ourselves, about our families, about the people that we're a part of, where we come from. And as Jews, this is really central to who we are, is telling our own story and keeping that going from generation to generation. And so every year we're getting together to do that. So back to kind of the Bible story, right? The Exodus takes the Israelites back to the Promised Land, to the land that's called the Land of Israel. And it's the place where the Jewish culture, religion, our Hebrew language is all native to, where we say that the Jewish people are actually indigenous to the land of Israel. And I know this is a really complicated time in the world, with the state of Israel being at war with the Hamas terror organization in Gaza. And it's not really the subject of the talk today, although that's another thing that I'm happy to maybe come back some other time and speak about, or can take it in a form of a question at the end. But the point is that as Jews, that's where we're from. We're from this land of Israel, and we'll trace our story as part of that. So if we've been talking about memory and history, if we were to do the history side of things, I would break up all of Jewish history into three major eras. You could call it Judaism 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0. So 1.0 is what we call biblical Judaism. And this is a depiction of the Holy Temple, which God commanded the Israelites, the Jews, to build in Jerusalem. There was a Holy Temple, actually two of them, that stood on this site called the Temple Mount in center of Jerusalem, where was the center of Jewish religious, political, social life. Everything revolved around this temple, and the first one was destroyed by the Babylonian empire. The Babylonians came in 586 and destroyed that first temple, sent the Jews into this sort of first exile that was actually very short. It was only about 70-some years before Cyrus, the king of Persia, liberated the Jews and allowed them to return home. They came back to Jerusalem, built a second temple. But when that one was destroyed in the year 70 CE, that was the end of this temple period. And here you can see a map kind of from that first temple period, what the kingdom of Israel under King David and King Saul, and roughly what those borders looked like. And you can see that it really shares a strong resemblance to where the state of Israel is today, still with Jerusalem as its capital. So after 70 CE, Jews are in exile, or another word that's developed for it is called the diaspora, and really scattered to different parts of the world, no longer having our temple anymore. Judaism needs to basically reinvent itself. And it's a really, I think, underappreciated part of our story, is that if the whole religion was based around this temple, and then the temple is destroyed, then you, in theory, really shouldn't have a religion anymore. What do you do? And so these amazing scholars who thought of, okay, how can we keep this going? How can we turn this temple-based religion into something that's portable, that we can take with us anywhere in the world? And instead of it being around this kind of sacred practice of sacrificing in the temple, which was a common practice back in the Near East in those times, they made it a religion that revolved around sacred text and sacred time. Time was already a sacred concept that we have the Holy Sabbath I'll talk about in a few minutes. We have Jewish holidays, holy days, right? And then text also can become sacred, and that the act of reading and learning and engaging with the text, wrestling with the text, arguing with the text, it becomes really foundational to what the Jewish experience is, no matter where you live in the world. As long as you have some community of fellow Jews to engage in this with, you can practice Judaism as long as the powers that be will allow that. And so here I'll share a little bit about my own family background and where we come from. And so I was born in Minnesota. I grew up in St. Louis Park, right outside Minneapolis. I live in Minneapolis today. But my father was born in Israel. My father was born in Israel in 1951, and he came to the United States as a young man in 1974, actually April of 74. So 50 years to the month that we're in right now, my father, who passed away about 11 years ago. In Judaism, we say of blessed memory. After someone dies and you speak of them, it's a way of, we believe that when a person dies, their body is no more, their body is gone, but their soul lives on. Their soul is eternal, and we can kind of keep their soul alive, and their soul can enrich our own lives by speaking of them and telling their story and saying that their memory, their soul is going to continue to bless us in these days. And so when you say of a person who died, like in my case, my father, Reuven, Rahamim, of blessed memory, that's how we say it. So Reuven was born in Israel in 1951, but his parents were born in Iran, in a town called Shiraz, Iran, where the family had lived for generations in a community of what's called Persian Jews. And that's a little bit unique for Jews living in Minnesota. There aren't a lot of other Persian Jews in the community. On my mom's side, it is a much more kind of typical Jewish story. My mom's grandparents, my great-grandparents, were the immigrants on that side. They came from Eastern Europe, from some place between Poland and Russia, that the borders kept going back and forth. If you've ever seen Fiddler on the Roof, right, you can kind of picture where they came from, and that indeed, around the turn of the century, the end of the 1800s, beginning of the 1900s, 2 million Jews come from that part of the world to the United States. My great-grandparents were part of that migration, fleeing really what we call pogroms, anti-Jewish riots that would sort of erupt out of nowhere, and it became unsafe to live in that part of the world where they had also, for generations, for centuries, been Eastern European Jews, where they spoke Yiddish, a language that's kind of an amalgamation of Hebrew and German, and they brought their whole lives to the United States. And so that's actually very representative of what happened globally to the Jewish people in the later part of this period. In the year 1880, the number of, or rather, the percentage of Jews who lived in the United States, or we could even say North America, and the land of Israel, right? Remember, land of Israel, we had our exile. We weren't really based there anymore, but there were always a continuous presence of Jews living in what are called the four holy cities: Jerusalem, Tzfat, Hebron, and Tiberias, kind of mixing some of the English names and Hebrew names for those cities. So there was always some Jews who had lived there. But I want to hear if anyone has a guess. In 1880, the percentage of the global Jewish population who were living in those two geographies, the land of Israel, which at the time was part of the Ottoman Empire, or here in North America, what percentage of the Jews in that year, 140 years ago? There is a right answer, but there's no penalty for being wrong. 80-20? 80 being where? Outside. Yeah, you're pretty close. It's about 10% of the Jews in the world at that time are living in North America or the land of Israel. Now, today, what do you think the percentages are? 50-50, okay. Another guess? Lower than 50% live in those two places? It's actually much higher. We've done a complete flip. And now about 90% of the world's Jews only live in basically one of two places: North America, or what's now called the State of Israel, right, which was established in 1948. We often hear Judaism sort of in the same breath as Christianity and Islam, as these kind of three monotheistic faiths. But in what we call actually Jewish peoplehood, right, the collective of being Jewish, it includes religion, but it is not only that. So it's being a member of, kind of like being a member of a family, where you can be born into the family, you can be adopted and kind of convert into the family. And there's not any particular beliefs that you must hold in order to be a member of the family. Once you're part of the family, you're family. And your specific beliefs or practices and how you live your life, is really up to you, and you want to live in good harmony with the rest of your family. But no matter kind of how you choose to live your life and what disagreements there might be, you're still part of the family. And the same thing really holds in Judaism, and ideally this is true in families, I should say. That you can be secular, even atheist, and be fully part of the Jewish people. That those two things, you can be an atheist Jew, right, which is not something you could say an atheist Christian, atheist Muslim. Those concepts don't really exist. Atheist Jew is a totally coherent concept. I know many of them. Many of my friends self-identify as atheist Jews. So the religious aspect of Judaism is not super important to them, but they still feel fully part of the Jewish community through our shared history and our shared future. Yeah. Exactly, yes. So an atheist Jew would be very likely to attend one of these Passover Seders. They would, because we'll talk in a second about kind of synagogue being the Jewish house of worship, as opposed to a church in Christianity or a mosque in Islam. Jews, we have synagogue. And some holidays are really, you go to the synagogue to observe the holiday. Passover is a holiday that's actually much more celebrated at home. And for that reason, you will have an atheist Jew very likely to celebrate in the Passover Seder, and they will still experience it as that it is our story, that we were slaves in Egypt and we became a free people, and fully embrace that. And it just, if you're an atheist Jew, you might not be as attached to the role that God plays in the story, or maybe you don't take it as literally, that God sent these 10 plagues and split the sea, right? Maybe you have some scientific questions about the accuracy of that, which is why we separate these ideas of history and memory. The historical accuracy of the Exodus story, if you're an atheist, maybe you challenge that. But the memory aspect of it is fully embraced and fully integrated in your Jewish identity. Does that make sense? And I think what we're getting to is that being Jewish doesn't require any particular beliefs. It's not a tradition that's grounded in belief, or faith is not a word that's strongly associated with Judaism. It's much more about practice and how you show up in the world. And different Jews will emphasize different aspects of what's instructed to us in our tradition. Here's an image that maybe is kind of helpful along this point. So if you think of an iceberg, right, there's a part that you see above the surface, and then there's much more below the surface. So in this analogy, what you see above the surface, what many Americans will see and make assumptions about Jewish people, is that there may be a religion, and they'll often see skin color, right? I spoke about how so many Jews came from that Eastern Europe part of the world. So maybe they assume that most Jews, or even all Jews, are white, or have white skin. But if you go to Israel, most of the Jews there are like my family, coming from Middle Eastern countries like Iran and Iraq and Yemen and Morocco and Egypt and Lebanon and those types of places, Ethiopia as well, black Jews. And so skin color, religion, these are part of our story, but we really are much more of a multiracial, multi-ethnic people that have our own language and history and culture, and that's really what ties us together, much more so than the religious precepts. Is that, now are we tracking?
Excuse me, sir. For the sake of the presentation, making sure that everyone has an opportunity to answer some questions, maybe we'll come back to those at the proper time. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's all good. It's okay. Okay.
I was just kind of curious how you're saying the Africans and black ethnicity.
Yeah.
But I mean, there was an incident not too long ago where Israel expelled.
Yeah. It's all good. We'll move on. Maybe we'll have time for that one toward the end. All right. Well, this is a good point too, that there are lots of paradoxes, contradictions that are inherent to Judaism. Right? One of the things I spoke about from the beginning is the stories from the Bible, and how it starts as this what we call universal story, the story of all of humanity, and then sort of pivots to this particular story of one family and their relationship with the divine, with God. And so Judaism contains kind of both of these principles. Another one of the Rabbi Hillel's famous sayings, probably even more famous than the other one, is to say, if I am only for myself, then what am I for? But if I am not for myself, who will be for me? And if not now, when? There's different ways you can translate it. But basically, the idea is that as Jews, we need to be concerned for each other as a community. We also need to have we also need to be part of the broader the world and have concern for both, the universal and the particular. These are ideas that are really often in tension with each other, and different Jews will emphasize different aspects. Some Jews are much more leaning toward the universal side, some are more on the particular side. And that's okay. That's all part of how we have this incredible amount of diversity within our small group of people. But there are some things that I think are common to all, to the foundational ideas of Judaism, so I'll tick off some of these. So Jews believe in the one loving and merciful God who created the universe. We spoke about that. The sanctity of life. This is a central Jewish concept that all human beings are created in the image of God. In Hebrew we call it B'Tselem Elohim, that in each and every one of us there is some divine spark. That is what makes us human, that we are endowed with some aspect of godliness. And therefore, the highest principle that you can achieve is to save another person's life. And so we have all these commandments in Judaism and things that we're instructed to do, but the number one hierarchy, if some of them are in conflict with each other, let's say, for example, the Sabbath. Jews are commanded to rest on the Sabbath, to not work. And a religious Jewish person, an observant Jew, will not do any activity of productivity, active creation on the Sabbath. And in today's modern times, that means not working, not using technology, really kind of being offline in connection with your family and your community. It's really a brilliant idea in today's age when we're always so plugged in to our devices and to our different demands, to have a day to shut down and relax and turn it all off, I think is a beautiful thing. That's a tangent. So if one of the precepts is to observe the Sabbath and to not work, which would also include, it also means like don't light a fire, you're not allowed to light fire on the Sabbath, which has been translated to you can't use electricity, you can't start a car engine. But if someone's life is in danger, and you have the opportunity to save their life, then that principle supersedes any other commandments, including the observance of Shabbat. So, that's that piece. Image of God, I stated that one. And connecting with God by bringing holiness into everyday life. That's an essence of Judaism, that we look for opportunities of sacredness, and that can take many different forms, of gratitude, of expression of thanks for all the good things in our lives. And right when a person wakes up in the morning, the first thing that you're supposed to say as a Jewish person is called Modeh Ani. I am grateful to God for breathed life into me for a new day. That I'm here again. I went to. It's kind of like when we go to sleep. It's almost as if we are sort of in this in-between space between being alive and dead. And then when we wake up, we're alive again, and we're grateful for that. I mentioned sacred time. And then, yes, the land of Israel also being a central part of our identity. Let's see. I mentioned a synagogue. I'll show you a few pictures of some different synagogues. Some of these are in Minnesota. Some of these are in Europe. Some are in Israel. And one thing that all synagogues have in common is that they are built so that the direction you face when you are praying is toward Jerusalem. Jerusalem has always been the eternal capital of the Jewish people. That's our spiritual North Star. And so wherever you are in the world, if you enter a synagogue, you will be facing toward Jerusalem. So in Minnesota, it means we're facing east, pretty much. And I spoke also a little bit about some of the different branches in Judaism, that you can have a spectrum of observance between kind of orthodox on the one end, where you're going to be most adherent to the laws and principles that are in the Torah, and reform on the other end, where they're most flexible and in trying to blend a modern lifestyle with the spirit of what the Torah teaches. And then you have something called conservative, which has nothing to do with the way we use conservative in like the political sense in America, but it just is the middle point between those two, and you have lots of diversity even between all of those. And we have synagogues from each of these branches in Minnesota. So one, I think, maybe final piece here is to share on the idea of keeping kosher. This is another one of the ways in which, again, observant Jews would practice Judaism in their daily life is by following certain dietary restrictions. And this is part of like being mindful about the food that we eat, and there are specific laws that Jews are instructed to follow. And again, it's up to each individual Jew to determine whether they want to incorporate that into their lifestyle or not. And that doesn't make anyone more Jewish, less Jewish, good Jew, bad Jew. We don't use those kinds of frameworks, but that we accept that these are the laws, these are the instructions that are part of our tradition, and we get to choose, especially as adults. If you're a child and you're growing up in a home, you're going to do what's the customs of your parents and your home. But as an adult, that's something that we get to choose. And then, okay, here's one last concept I'll share. It's called Tikkun Olam. Tikkun Olam is the principle of repairing the world. It looks at our humanity and our situation on this planet as being inherently broken, that and I think we can all kind of look around and acknowledge the various ways in which we live in an imperfect world, right? And part of our charge as Jews is to find each our own individual way of repairing the world, and doing one small thing kind of each day or throughout our lifetimes to make the world a little bit of a better place, whether that's through protecting the environment, healing the sick, visiting the comforting mourners, right? There's all sorts of different ways in which we can make the world a better place. So with that, I think I will pause the presentation and open it up for some discussion.
I told you all about this before we started.
You mentioned that the Jewish people are or were indigenous to the land that's now called Israel, and aren't the Palestinians also indigenous there?
You're right. You're 100% right. And that's part of what makes why we still have this conflict still going on, is because you have two indigenous groups that are struggling to find a way to share that same land. And so, absolutely, the Jewish people claim to be indigenous from the land of Israel. Palestinians claim to be indigenous from the same land that they call Palestine. And it's a fascinating complexity in terms of how that all works, given that Jews have sort of a much longer history there before the place was even called Palestine. And yet, when Jews returned to their homeland in the 20th century, there were also these people there who now call themselves Palestinians. And that is the essence of Israeli-Palestinian conflict, is trying to figure out how to have both peoples live in this same land. And the idea that's been put forward now for over 80 years as kind of the way that to do that would be to have two states in that land, one called Israel, that's the homeland for Jewish people, and one called Palestine, that's the homeland for Palestinians. And for a variety of very complex reasons, and it depends, you'll get different answers depending on who you ask on why why there isn't a two-state solution, why we don't have that, why we're at war right now, in a way, over it. And it's a really heartbreaking that all these years have gone by, and there's very much, not only is there not peace there, but it's quite the opposite. Got you down in the front. Here, he's coming with the mic.
You referred to a wide variety of thinking and attitudes within the Jewish people. And I'm curious about human sexuality, and being raised as a Christian, it seems like Christians have on two opposite views. We don't talk about it. Two, the smart thing to do is to be open and honest about sexuality, starting with teaching our children. So I'm just wondering if there's a take that you would offer on where Jewish people are on teaching about human sexuality.
Yeah. So I think you started in the right place with that question, that there's a variety and diversity of approaches to all matters in life within Judaism, and human sexuality and openness in terms of sexual orientation and acceptance of LGBT people in our families and in our community. There's different approaches across that spectrum that I talked about in terms of Orthodox, conservative, reform. And as you might imagine, the further you are toward the Orthodox end of the spectrum, the less accepting that it is generally still to, if this is your question, right, to come out as an openly gay, lesbian person. On the other end of the spectrum, it's very accepting, very welcoming. We have gay and lesbian rabbis in the Twin Cities and congregations that really serve that population. And so I think it's similar to within Christianity in some ways, where I know there are some Catholic churches that it's not very accepting of and I know that's obviously starting to change, and slowly but surely. And then there's churches in Minneapolis that fly pride flags, right? And so there's going to be diversity within the Jewish people as well. Yes, back there.
I just have a question about the Jewish calendar.
Yeah.
If you could maybe. I just have a question about the Jewish calendar. If you could just speak for a moment about what that is and how it's different than the calendar that people follow today.
Yes, thank you. Great question. So the Jewish calendar follows the lunar calendar. So we're following the cycle of the moon, and a new moon equals a new month, and our Jewish holidays are following that calendar, and it's also kind of synced up with the agricultural and seasonal cycles of the land of Israel. So Passover, for example, is a springtime holiday, and that really reflects kind of the season in Israel. Better example would be the kind of Jewish Arbor Day, the holiday that celebrates the blooming and blossoming of the trees. This typically falls in our Gregorian calendar in January. So as someone growing up in Minnesota, it was always a little bit challenging to connect with that holiday as like the new year for the blossoming of trees. But that's because it wasn't meant to be practiced in Minnesota. It's for the land of Israel, where the trees are starting to blossom around then. And then the other important thing to say about how Jews observe time is that our daily cycle, a new day, actually starts at sundown, starts in the evening. And we've traced that origin back to the story of creation in Genesis, where it says there was evening and then there was morning, the first day. That's how a day is described. And so the Jewish Sabbath, which is the seventh day of the week, actually begins on Friday night. So the Jewish Sabbath, the holy day for Jews, starts Friday at sundown and runs through nightfall on Saturday.
What about year to year?
So we are in the year 5784 on the Jewish calendar. And the new year is typically celebrated sometime in September, October. And we actually have, this is like really complicated, but there are kind of 4 traditional New Years on the Jewish calendar, including around this time of year as well, in the springtime. But the holiday that's called Rosh Hashanah, head of the year, the start of the year, falls in the fall, kind of as you're going into fall and the start of winter here in Minnesota. Yeah.
If you were looking to follow the Jewish holidays, where would you look for like how to do the practices of that holiday?
Yeah. So to learn more about Jewish practice and beliefs and ideas, there's a wonderful website called My Jewish Learning. I think I don't know if it's .com or .org, but My Jewish Learning, they have lots of articles and videos that have really helpful kind of introductory content, and then you can go deeper into learning about the different holidays that take place throughout the year. And they'll be updating, right, their homepage with kind of what's current. So I'm guessing if you went now, you would start to see stuff about Passover, which begins in a couple of weeks. A couple of weeks previous to now, we celebrated a holiday called Purim, which is a more irreverent Jewish holiday that we celebrate not being destroyed by in the Persian Empire, and it's a holiday where Jews dress up in costumes and go to the synagogue, and we read from this scroll, the Book of Esther, and it's a very fun holiday.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the time that we have to wrap up. We have several students who have to get on to the next class. Thank you all so much for being here today. We hope that we will see you at our final Cultural Thursday of this year, which will be in May, which will be on the topic of Nicaragua. Thank you for being here, and please join me in thanking Mr. Rahamim for his presentation.